I should have turned around the moment I saw the house, because no home that large should have felt that silent. The West Estate sat behind 12-foot iron gates at the end of a private road 30 miles north of the city, all pale stone, black windows, and sharp rooftops cutting into the stormy sky, like something built to keep secrets in and mercy out. It was 2:13 in the morning when my cab stopped at the gate. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror like he wanted to ask if I was sure, but he didn't. People in New York learn not to question rich houses with cameras on every post. I paid him, stepped out into the cold rain, and watched his taillights disappear down the road faster than they had arrived. That was the first time I felt truly alone. My name is Grace Miller. I was 28 years old, a child trauma therapist with student loans, a leaking apartment in Queens, and a bad habit of answering emergency calls from people who sounded desperate enough to forget I was human too. At 1:26 a.m., Dr. Samuel Pierce had called my personal line. His voice was low, controlled, frightened underneath. He said there was a 7-year-old boy who had not spoken in 9 months. He said the family had tried specialists from Boston, Chicago, Los Angeles, even Europe. He said the child had stopped sleeping. Then he said the name West, and the room around me seemed to change temperature. Everyone in the city knew that name. Adrian West owned hotels, shipping companies, restaurants, charities, judges' smiles, and men's silence. Some called him a businessman. Some called him worse. I called him none of those things, because people like me survive by not saying names out loud. The gate opened before I touched the buzzer. No voice came through the speaker. No greeting. Just the slow mechanical groan of iron parting in the rain. I walked up the long driveway with my coat pulled tight around me, my therapy bag knocking against my hip, my shoes soaking through before I reached the front steps. The mansion door opened before I knocked. A woman in a black dress stood there, silver hair pinned so perfectly it looked carved. Her face held no surprise, no warmth, no welcome. She looked at me the way people look at a stain they intend to remove later. "Miss Miller," she said, "you're late." I checked my watch. I was called less than an hour ago. Her mouth curved, but it was not a smile. In this house, need does not wait. I should have left then. I know that now. But through the open doorway, somewhere deep inside that marble silence, I heard a child make a sound. Not a cry, not a word. A small broken breath, like fear trying not to be heard. I stepped inside. The door closed behind me with a final click. The foyer was enormous, cold, and impossibly still. A chandelier hung above us like frozen rain. Portraits lined the walls, generations of West men staring down in dark suits and colder eyes. But what caught my attention was not the money, or the silence, or the 2 men standing near the staircase with their hands folded in front of them. It was the clock. A tall grandfather clock stood against the far wall, polished black wood, gold hands, glass face spotless. The hands had stopped at 11:47. I looked past it and saw another clock on the mantel. 11:47, a silver clock on the entry table. 11:47, 3 clocks in one room, all dead at the same minute. The woman noticed me staring. "Old wiring," she said. "Too quickly, too cleanly." I looked at her, then back at the clocks, and felt the first thread of something wrong pull tight in my chest. Before I could answer, footsteps sounded from the upper floor. Slow, measured, heavy enough to make the house seem to listen. I looked up. Adrian West stood at the top of the staircase in a black suit with no tie, his white shirt open at the collar, his dark blonde hair damp like he had run his hands through it too many times. He was not what I expected. Men with that much power usually tried to fill a room. Adrian did not have to. The room made space for him on its own. His eyes were gray, sharp, and exhausted in a way no amount of wealth could hide. He looked at me for 3 seconds, and I felt assessed, not admired. Measured, not welcomed. "You're the therapist," he said. "I'm Grace Miller. Can you make my son speak?" The question was blunt, almost cruel in its hope. I held his gaze even though every instinct told me to look away. "No," I said softly, "but I can listen until he's ready." Something moved across his face. Irritation, maybe, or pain pretending to be irritation. Then from the hallway behind him, a small boy stepped into view. Bare feet, dark pajamas, pale face, eyes too old for 7. He held a sketchbook against his chest like a shield. Adrian turned slightly, and the entire mansion seemed to hold its breath. "Noah," he said, his voice changing in a way so subtle I almost missed it. Softer. Careful. The boy did not look at him. He looked at me. Then he opened the sketchbook and held up a drawing. A woman on a staircase. A door with no handle. A black ring. And in the corner, written over and over in a child's uneven hand, one time, 11:47. For one impossible second, no one moved. Rain whispered against the windows. The grandfather clock stood silent behind me, its frozen hands pointing to the same minute written on Noah West's page. I looked at the drawing, then at the boy, and every professional rule I had built my life around rose up inside me like a warning. Do not react too fast. Do not make the child feel exposed. Do not turn his fear into a room full of adult panic. So I lowered myself slowly to one knee on the marble floor, making myself smaller than him, easier to approach, easier to leave. That is a very careful drawing, I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Noah's fingers tightened around the sketchbook. His eyes flicked to the silver-haired woman beside the door, then to Adrian, then back to me. He did not speak, but his silence had weight. It pressed against the walls. Adrian started down the stairs. Noah, come here. The boy flinched. Not from fear of his father, I realized. From the command. From the shape of control in the air. Adrian saw it too. His jaw tightened, and something wounded passed behind his gray eyes before he stopped halfway down. I turned the page gently with Noah's permission, waiting until he gave the smallest nod. The next drawing showed a hallway. Long dark. A door at the end of it. No handle again. Beside the door stood a woman with yellow hair, her face left blank except for two blue circles where eyes should have been. A black ring floated above her head like a moon. I heard the silver-haired woman inhale through her nose. Children imagine things, she said. Especially children who have been indulged by too many doctors. I did not look at her. Children also remember things adults wish they would forget. The air changed so sharply that I felt it on my skin. Adrian reached the bottom step. Mother, he said quietly. So that was who she was. Margaret West. The woman whose portrait probably belonged in some boardroom, not beside a frightened child at 2 a.m. She lifted her chin. I am only saying what everyone here understands. The boy needs discipline, not strangers encouraging fantasies. Noah pressed the sketchbook harder to his chest. I kept my eyes on him. Noah, I said, would you like to draw with me somewhere quieter? He stared at me for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Adrian exhaled like he had been holding his breath for months. Use the library, Margaret said before he could speak. The West Wing is closed. Noah's face went pale. There it was again. West Wing. A direction that felt less like a part of a house and more like a wound nobody wanted touched. The library is fine, I said. Adrian's eyes narrowed, not at me, but at his mother. For the first time since I arrived, I saw the smallest crack in his control. I will show you, he said. He walked us down a corridor lined with old paintings and darker doors. Noah stayed close to me, not touching, but near enough that I could hear his uneven breathing. Every few steps, he looked over his shoulder toward the staircase, toward the clocks, toward whatever had happened at 11:47. The library smelled like leather, dust, and old rain trapped in wood. A fire burned low behind a brass screen, throwing gold light over shelves that reached the ceiling. Adrian opened the door and stood aside. He did not enter right away. Powerful men usually take space without asking. Adrian West hovered at the edge of his own room like he was afraid of frightening his son by existing too loudly. That surprised me more than his money, more than his reputation, more than the silent guards in the hall. Noah and I need privacy, I said. Margaret's voice came from behind us, smooth as glass. Absolutely not. Adrian turned. Yes. One word. Quiet. Final. Margaret's expression did not change, but her eyes hardened. You are making a mistake. Then it will be mine. The two of them looked at each other, and I understood I had not walked into a home. I had walked into a war that had learned to speak politely. Margaret left without another word. Adrian remained by the door. 30 minutes, he said to me. No pressure. No questions that corner him. No promises you cannot keep. I met his gaze. Those are my rules too. For a second, he looked almost human. Then he nodded and closed the door. Noah stood in the middle of the library, small beneath all that carved wood and old money. I sat on the rug, opened my bag, and spread colored pencils between us. You do not have to talk, I told him. You do not have to explain. You can just show me what your hands remember. His eyes filled, but no tears fell. He chose a gray pencil first, then black, then red, which he held for a long time before putting it back. Finally, he began to draw the door again. This time, he added something new beneath it. A thin line of light. The line of light beneath the drawn door was so thin I almost missed it. Noah shaded the hallway around it until the white paper disappeared beneath layers of black and gray. But he left that one narrow strip untouched. Clean, bright, deliberate. I watched his hand move, careful not to lean too close. Children like Noah noticed everything. Pressure, silence, pity, fear pretending to be patience. That light matters, I said softly. He paused, but he did not look up. His fingers tightened around the pencil, then loosened again. I reached into my bag and pulled out a blank sheet, placing it beside his drawing. I am going to draw my own door, I told him. Mine will probably be less mysterious than yours. His eyes flicked toward me. Not amused exactly, but present. That was enough. I drew a simple rectangle, crooked at the top, then added a round knob and a little welcome mat. This is the door to my apartment, I said. It sticks when it rains. The hallway smells like old carpet. My neighbor plays television game shows too loud. But it is mine, so I like it. Noah stared at the knob on my drawing. Then he looked back at his own door. No knob. No way in. No way out. My chest tightened. Some doors are not meant to be opened alone, I said. His pencil slipped from his fingers and rolled across the rug. Before I could pick it up, the library door opened. Adrian stood there, one hand still on the handle, his expression unreadable. He is tired, he said. It was not a question. Noah immediately closed the sketchbook. Not fast enough. Adrian saw the page. He saw the door. He saw the line of light. The change in him was almost invisible, but I felt it the way you feel thunder before it arrives. His shoulders went still. His eyes sharpened. His face lost what little color it had. Where did he see that? He asked. I stood slowly. You recognize it. That is not what I asked. His voice was quiet, but the room seemed to shrink around it. Noah slid backward until his shoulders touched the side of the armchair. That movement pulled Adrian back to himself. He looked at his son, and the command drained from his face so quickly it almost hurt to witness. Noah, he said, lower now. You are not in trouble. The boy did not move. I stepped between them without thinking. Not to challenge Adrian. To give Noah something softer to look at. Adrian noticed. Of course he did. Men like him noticed everything. Miss Miller, he said, step outside. No. The word came out before caution could stop it. His eyes moved to mine. The fire cracked behind me. Rain tapped against the tall windows. Somewhere outside the library, the dead clocks kept their frozen minute. Noah is still regulated, I said. If you pull me out now and make this about answers, he may shut down again. Adrian stared at me for a long moment. I could feel the Old West house listening through its walls. Then he looked at the sketchbook in his son's arms. That door is in the West Wing. Noah made a sound so small I might have imagined it. A broken inhale. Adrian heard it. His jaw flexed. Nobody has entered that room in 9 months. Since 1147, I said. The words landed between us like glass hitting stone. Adrian's eyes cut to me. Who told you that? I nodded toward the foyer beyond the closed door. Every clock in this house. For the first time, he looked less like a king and more like a man trapped inside a story he had been afraid to reread. He turned away from us, dragging one hand over his mouth, then looked toward the hallway as if he could see through the walls to that locked room. My wife died in that wing, he said. No emotion, no tremor, just a sentence carried too carefully because it had already broken him once. Noah pressed the sketchbook to his chest and squeezed his eyes shut. I lowered my voice. Adrian, whatever that room is, your son is still living inside it. He did not answer. Outside the library, footsteps passed and stopped. Margaret's voice came through the door, smooth and cold. That is enough for tonight. Noah opened his eyes. Adrian looked at the door, then back at me. In that silence, I understood something terrifying. The most feared man in the city was not afraid of enemies, or rumors, or bloodlines, or loss. He was afraid of one locked room in his own house, because somewhere behind that door, the truth was still breathing. Margaret opened the library door before Adrian gave her permission. She did not knock. Women like her did not knock in houses they believed belonged to their will. Her eyes moved from Noah to me, then to the sketchbook held against his chest, and for one brief second her polished face showed something sharp enough to cut through all that elegance. Fear. Then it vanished. "The child needs sleep," she said, "and Miss Miller needs to understand boundaries." Adrian stepped between her and Noah with such quiet control that the room seemed to tighten around him. "Miss Miller will return tomorrow." Margaret's gaze lifted to him. "Will she?" "Yes." One word. No volume. No discussion. I should have felt protected. Instead, I felt the floor shift beneath all of us. I had not been invited back into a therapy case. I had been pulled deeper into a family secret wearing a marble mask. Noah watched me with wide eyes as I packed my pencils. I wanted to promise him I would come back. I wanted to say no one would force him into silence again. But promises are dangerous things around wounded children. So I only touched 2 fingers to the edge of my own sketch paper and said, "I will keep this safe until I see you again." His shoulders lowered by half an inch. In his world, that was trust. Adrian walked me to the front door himself. No guards followed close enough to hear us. The hallway felt longer than before, the dead clocks colder, the portraits more awake. When we reached the foyer, he stopped beside the grandfather clock frozen at 11:47. "You noticed too much tonight," he said. "That is usually what people hire me for." His mouth did not smile, but something in his eyes moved. "Most people I hire know when to look away." I pulled my coat tighter. "Your son cannot afford another adult looking away." The words hung between us. Outside, dawn had not arrived yet, but the rain had softened to mist. Adrian opened the door. Cold air swept in, carrying the smell of wet stone and pine. "A car will take you home. I can call a cab." At 3 in the morning, 30 miles from the city, standing outside my house. His tone was calm, but it left no room for foolish pride. "Take the car, Grace." It was the first time he said my name. I hated that I noticed. I hated more that it sounded less like an order than a plea disguised as one. I went home as the sky turned gray, but I did not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the door without a handle. The line of light. Noah's small hand choosing black, gray, almost red. By 6 in the evening, I was back at the West Estate. This time, there was no storm. Just a pale sunset bleeding behind the trees and a house that looked almost beautiful from a distance. That was how dangerous things survived. They learned to look beautiful from far away. A maid led me not to the library, but to the dining room. I stopped at the entrance. 12 people sat around a table long enough to separate truth from consequence. Crystal glasses, white roses, silverware arranged with military precision. Margaret sat at one end in cream silk, calm as a judge. Adrian stood near the fireplace, his hands in his pockets, his face unreadable. Noah was not there. "Miss Miller," Margaret said warmly, and somehow the warmth was worse than the cold. "We thought it was time you understood the family you are so eager to examine." I looked at Adrian. He gave almost nothing away, but his eyes told me he had not arranged this. Margaret lifted her glass. "Some women mistake access for importance. Some mistake a child's grief for an invitation. And some, sadly, build entire careers teaching broken children to distrust the people who love them." The table stayed silent. Not one person looked surprised. That was when I understood. This was not dinner. This was a warning served on porcelain. I stayed standing at the doorway because sitting at that table felt too much like accepting their rules. Margaret noticed. Of course she did. Her smile sharpened by a fraction, small enough that anyone else might have missed it, but I had spent years reading children who survived rooms where adults smiled before they lied. "Please," she said, gesturing to an empty chair halfway down the table. "Join us." Adrian did not move from the fireplace. His eyes stayed on his mother, not me, and that told me he was calculating something. In his world, people did not speak without purpose. In Margaret West's world, kindness was only another kind of lock. I crossed the room and sat. The chair was heavy, carved dark wood, too formal to feel like furniture. A man across from me introduced himself as Caleb West. He was younger than Adrian, maybe 32, with bright blue eyes and a charming face that had been taught how to look harmless. "Grace Miller," he said, turning my name over like he had already looked me up. "Queen's address. Private practice. Specializes in childhood trauma. Impressive work for someone with such modest funding." My hand tightened around the napkin in my lap. Adrian's gaze cut to him. "Enough." Caleb lifted both hands, innocent. I was complimenting her. Margaret took a slow sip of water. Information is not cruelty, Adrian. It is protection. I looked around the table, at the expensive watches, the untouched plates, the faces trained to reveal nothing. Protection from what? I asked. A therapist with colored pencils? One woman near the end of the table looked down quickly, hiding something that almost resembled a smile. Margaret did not. From people who enter wounded families and mistake pain for opportunity. The words were soft. The accusation was not. Before I could answer, a sound came from the hallway. Tiny feet on polished floor. Every adult at the table went still. Noah appeared in the doorway wearing navy pajamas, his sketchbook pressed flat against his chest. He was not looking at anyone else. Only me. I stood immediately. "Hey," I said softly. "Did the room get too loud?" He nodded once. Margaret's voice turned cold under the sugar. "Noah, you know better than to interrupt dinner." He flinched. Adrian saw it. This time, he did not miss it, and something in his face changed. Not anger. Recognition. Pain becoming useful. He stepped away from the fireplace. He can interrupt any room in this house. Margaret's fork touched her plate with a quiet click. Noah came to my side and reached for the sleeve of my sweater, not my hand, just the fabric. A child asking for safety without risking rejection. I lowered myself beside his chair and breathed slowly so he could borrow my rhythm. His chest moved too fast. His eyes kept darting toward Caleb, then Margaret, then the west hallway beyond the dining room. "You are here," I whispered. "You are safe right now." His lips parted. No sound came out. Then he began to hum. 3 notes. Barely there. Soft as a secret under a door. I froze, because I knew that melody. Not from memory. From him. He had hummed it the night before in the library while drawing the line of light. Across the room, Adrian went completely still. His face drained in a way no man could fake. "Where did you hear that?" he asked me. His voice was not dangerous now. It was almost broken. I looked up slowly. From Noah. The room seemed to lose air. Caleb's expression flickered. Margaret's hand tightened around her glass. Adrian stared at his son, then at me. Lillian used to sing that to him. The name moved through the table like a match held near paper. Noah's mother. The woman whose absence lived in every dead clock. I looked at the boy beside me, at the way he hid half his face against my sleeve, and understood why Margaret wanted him silent. He was not empty. He was carrying a room full of truth inside a body too small to hold it. Adrian crossed the room and knelt in front of his son, lowering himself until the most powerful man in that house was beneath a 7-year-old child. "Noah," he said, so gently it hurt to hear. "Did someone tell you not to sing that?" Noah's eyes filled. He looked past Adrian, straight at Margaret. And for the first time since I entered the West Estate, Adrian followed his son's fear instead of his family's voice. Adrian did not accuse his mother. Not then. Men like him did not move because emotion pushed them. They moved when the room gave them enough truth to make silence dangerous. He stood slowly, one hand resting on Noah's shoulder, his thumb still, careful, as if even comfort needed permission. Margaret looked back at him with perfect calm, but I saw the pulse moving at the base of her throat. Caleb reached for his wineglass and missed the stem by half an inch. Small things. Human things. Fear always leaked through the smallest cracks. "Dinner is over," Adrian said. No one argued. Chairs shifted softly against the floor. Plates remained untouched. The family left in pieces, not with panic, but with the practiced dignity of people retreating from a room before the truth could ask them to stay. Margaret paused beside me. Her perfume smelled like white roses and winter. "You are very gifted with broken children, Miss Miller," she said quietly. "Be careful that you do not become one of the broken things in this house." I held her gaze. I usually find that broken things are only dangerous to people who cause the fracture. Her eyes hardened. Then she walked away. Adrian heard me. I knew he did, because when I turned, his expression had changed again. Not softer, not warmer, just less certain of the walls he had trusted all his life. Noah tugged my sleeve. He pointed toward the hallway. Not the library this time. The west wing. Adrian saw the direction of his hand and went still. "No," he said. Noah did not flinch this time. He only pointed again. My heart began to beat harder. "Adrian," I said, "he is trying to show us something. That hallway is closed." "To whom?" The question was quiet, but it landed. Adrian looked at me, then at his son, then at the dark corridor beyond the dining room. For a long moment, He was not a mafia boss, not a king, not a name that made powerful men lower their voices. He was a father standing outside the one door he had never been brave enough to open. Finally, he reached into his pocket and removed a key. Black metal. Old. Worn at the edges. The West Wing smelled different from the rest of the house. Less polished. Less alive. The air was cool and dry, and our footsteps sounded too loud on the hardwood floor. Noah stayed between us, his small fingers clutching my sleeve while Adrian walked on his other side, close but not touching. At the end of the hallway stood the door from the drawings. Dark wood. No handle on the outside. Only a lock. Adrian stopped before it. His breathing changed. This was Lillian's sitting room, he said. After she died, my mother said it should be sealed. For Noah. For me. Noah shook his head. Once. Hard. Adrian looked down. No. The boy pointed to the floor near the doorframe. I knelt carefully. A narrow board sat slightly raised from the others, almost invisible unless someone had drawn it a dozen times in their mind. I pressed my fingers along the edge and felt it shift. Adrian lowered beside me and lifted it with the key. Beneath the board was a small velvet pouch, gray with dust. Noah stepped back, trembling. I opened it slowly. Inside lay half of a gold locket, the hinge bent, the surface engraved with 2 letters. L.W. Lillian West. Adrian did not touch it. His face went so still that it frightened me more than anger would have. There was something else in the pouch. A tiny recording device, the kind people use for interviews or reminders, scratched along one side but intact. Adrian stared at it like it had reached up from a grave and taken his hand. Play it, I whispered. He did not move. So I pressed the button. Static filled the hallway. Then a woman's voice, soft, breathless, urgent. Adrian, if you hear this, I did not leave you. Caleb knows about the accounts. Margaret helped him hide them. Noah saw too much. Please protect our son from this house. The recording ended with a click. No scream. No chaos. Just silence. And somehow, that silence was worse than any sound. Adrian closed his eyes. Noah leaned into my side and began to hum the lullaby again, barely audible, but steady. For the first time, the house did not feel silent. It felt accused. Adrian played the recording 3 more times. Each time, Lillian's voice filled the West Wing like a candle trying to survive inside a locked room. Each time, Noah pressed closer to my side. Each time, Adrian became quieter. Not calmer. Quieter. There is a difference. Calm rests on peace. Quiet can rest on ruin. When the final click came, he took the recorder from my hand with careful fingers and placed it in his jacket pocket. No one leaves the house, he said. He did not raise his voice, but somewhere down the hall, a guard straightened as if the walls themselves had carried the order. I should have been relieved. I was not. Truth does not always set people free right away. Sometimes it walks into a room full of liars and becomes the easiest person to blame. We returned to the dining room with Noah between us and the locket in Adrian's hand. The family had gathered again, not around food now, but around fear dressed as concern. Margaret stood near the head of the table, one palm resting on the back of Adrian's chair. Caleb was by the window, his face pale beneath the gold light. What have you done? Margaret asked, looking at me instead of her son. Adrian placed the locket on the table. The tiny sound of gold touching wood moved through the room like a verdict. You tell me. Margaret stared at it. For a second, her face changed. Not enough for most people. Enough for me. Where did she find that? She asked. Not where did you find that? She. The word pointed at me like a knife made of etiquette. Caleb turned quickly. This is absurd. She has been here 2 nights, and suddenly forgotten evidence appears beneath a floorboard. Murmurs moved around the table. Soft. Polite. Poisonous. One man said my name under his breath. Another looked at my worn shoes. Margaret did not have to shout. She had trained the whole family to do the work for her. Adrian, she said gently, you are grieving. You always have been. And now this woman has found the one place in you that still bleeds. Noah's hand tightened around mine. Adrian looked at his mother, then at me. I waited for him to speak. I waited for the man who had stood between his son and every shadow to stand between me and this one. But he said nothing. His silence opened beneath my feet. Margaret stepped closer, her voice soft enough to sound merciful. A struggling therapist from Queens enters this house, earns a frightened child's trust, and within 48 hours produces a recording that accuses 2 members of his own family. You do see how this looks. I did not produce anything, I said. My voice was steady. My heart was not. Noah showed us where it was. Caleb laughed once, without humor. The boy does not even speak. Adrian's eyes moved to him, cold and sharp, but still he did not defend me. Not fully. Not enough. And that was when I understood the cruelty of old families. They do not need to prove you are lying. They only need to make love hesitate long enough to wound you. I released Noah's hand gently and stood. I came here because a child needed help, I said. I stayed because he was carrying a truth too heavy for any child. I am not here for your money, your name, or your permission. Margaret smiled faintly. Then leave. The room went still. Adrian finally moved. Grace. I looked at him. The power in his face was still there. The beauty, the danger, the grief. But the trust was not brave enough yet. You do not have to choose me, I said. But do not ask your son to keep paying for your fear. I placed my sketch paper on the table beside Lillian's locket, the crooked door to my tiny apartment facing up under the chandelier. Then I walked out before anyone could see me break. Behind me, Noah made a sound. Not a word. Not yet. But close enough to make every clock in that dead house feel like it was holding its breath. I made it halfway across the foyer before Noah's sound became a word. Small. Cracked. Impossible. Grace. My hand froze on the front door. Behind me, the entire house stopped breathing. I turned slowly, afraid that if I moved too fast the moment would shatter and disappear. Noah stood at the edge of the dining room in his navy pajamas, one hand gripping the doorframe, the other pressed to his chest like he had pulled the word from somewhere deep and painful. Adrian was behind him, motionless. Margaret had gone pale. Caleb looked toward the windows as if the dark glass might offer him a place to hide. Grace, Noah said again, louder this time. My throat closed. For 9 months, that child had carried silence like a stone. Now he was standing in front of the people who had taught him fear, and he was using his first words to call me back. I took one careful step toward him. I am here, I whispered. His eyes filled, but his voice did not disappear. He pointed at the table, at the locket, at the recorder hidden inside Adrian's jacket. Then he looked at his grandmother. She did not lie. The words were uneven, rusty from disuse, but they were clear enough to cut through every polished excuse in that room. Margaret's face tightened. Noah, sweetheart, you are confused. He shook his head so hard his hair fell into his eyes. Grandma did. No one moved. Not the guards. Not the relatives. Not Caleb, whose charm finally slipped from his face like paint in the rain. Adrian lowered himself beside his son, not touching him yet, just close enough to be chosen. Noah, he said, voice barely above breath. What did Grandma do? Noah looked at me. I nodded once. Not to push. To remind him he was not alone. He swallowed. She said Mommy left because of me. The sentence broke something in Adrian. I saw it happen. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a man's whole world folding inward around one unbearable truth. Margaret stepped forward. He misunderstood. He was grieving. Children make stories when they cannot accept loss. No, Noah said. One word. Stronger than the last. Adrian stood. This time, when he faced his mother, there was no hesitation left in him. The room seemed to remember who he was. The walls. The portraits. The dead clocks. Even Margaret understood, because the confidence in her eyes dimmed. You told my son his mother abandoned him, Adrian said. His voice was quiet enough to be terrifying without needing volume. You let him sit in silence for 9 months because his pain protected your lie. Margaret lifted her chin, but her hands betrayed her, fingers tightening around the back of the chair. I protected this family. Adrian looked at the locket on the table, then at Noah, then at me. No, you protected the name. There is a difference. Caleb tried to speak, but Adrian raised one hand. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He only looked at him, and Caleb's mouth closed. Every account, every document, every person who helped hide what happened to Lillian. I want it brought to me before sunrise. The guards at the door moved silently. Margaret stared at him as if he had become a stranger. Maybe he had. Maybe truth makes strangers of people who have lived too long inside lies. Noah stepped away from the doorframe and walked to me. His steps were slow, uncertain, but he came on his own. When he reached me, he slipped his small hand into mine. I looked at Adrian, and for the first time, he did not look like a man asking to be obeyed. He looked like a father asking how to begin again. "Grace," he said, and my name sounded different now. Not like a command. Like an apology he had not earned the right to speak yet. I held Noah's hand and looked at the clock above the mantel. The hand still pointed to 11:47. Then, somewhere deep inside the old house, the grandfather clock gave a single click. The click moved through the foyer like the first breath after drowning. One by one, the clocks began to move. The mantel clock ticked. The silver clock on the entry table answered. Then the grandfather clock, silent for 9 months, released one deep sound that rolled through the West Estate and made every person in that room understand something had ended. Not Lillian's memory. Not Noah's pain. The lie. Adrian looked at the clock, then at his son, and I watched the most powerful man I had ever met lose the one thing he had always trusted most. The idea that blood could not betray him. He did not fall apart. Men like Adrian West did not know how to fall in public. But his face changed in a way that made me hurt for him anyway. He stepped toward Noah and lowered himself again, not as a boss, not as a judge, not as the owner of every shadow in that house. As a father. "I am sorry," he said. Noah looked at him with those old, tired eyes. Adrian's voice roughened. "I should have heard you even when you could not speak." Noah's fingers tightened around mine, then loosened. Slowly, carefully, he reached for his father. Adrian took his hand as if it were made of glass and grace. Across the room, Margaret stood alone at the head of the table she had ruled for years. No one moved toward her. Not Caleb. Not the relatives who had echoed her silence. Not the staff who had learned to disappear when West family history turned cold. Adrian rose with Noah beside him. "This house will not protect lies anymore," he said. Margaret lifted her chin. "Without me, this family would have collapsed." Adrian looked at her, and I saw the final thread break. "It collapsed the moment you taught my son to blame himself for his mother's absence." Caleb tried to leave through the side door. He did not get far. 2 men in dark suits stepped into the hallway and quietly blocked his path. No one touched him. No one needed to. Adrian's power had never been loudest when it shouted. It was loudest when the room obeyed before he finished breathing. "You will answer for the money," Adrian said to Caleb. "You will answer for the cover-up. And you will answer for what you helped do to my son's life." Caleb's face emptied of charm. Margaret looked at me then, as if I had been the storm that broke her windows. Maybe that was easier than admitting the house had been rotting before I arrived. "You think you saved them?" she asked. I held Noah's hand. "No," I said. "I just listened." By sunrise, the West Estate looked different. Not softer. Not healed. Healing is not a sunrise miracle. It is 1,000 honest mornings after years of locked doors. Margaret and Caleb were escorted out under Adrian's orders to face lawyers, investigators, and every consequence his name could summon without turning the night into something uglier than it already was. The West Wing was opened. Lillian's sitting room was dusted, aired, and left untouched except for one thing. Noah placed his sketchbook on the small table by the window. The final page showed the same door again, but this time it had a handle. 3 days later, Adrian came to my clinic in Queens with no guards inside. No expensive speech. No attempt to buy forgiveness with flowers or checks. He stood beneath the flickering hallway light outside my office, looking too large for the narrow space and too humbled for the man the city feared. In his hand was the old mantel clock from the estate. The hands moved steadily now. "Noah asked me to bring this," he said. "He said your office needs a clock that knows how to start over." I looked at the clock, then at him. "And what did you ask for?" Adrian swallowed. For once, power did not help him. The chance to become the kind of father my son deserves. And maybe, one day, the kind of man who deserved to have been believed sooner. I did not forgive him that morning. Real trust does not return because a powerful man finally tells the truth. But I let him sit in the waiting room while Noah drew at my little round table, sunlight falling across the crayons, his voice quiet but present as he told me about a bird still sitting on a winter branch. And when Adrian listened without interrupting, without commanding, without trying to own the moment, I understood that something in him had begun to change. He had spent his life protecting the West name. But in the end, it was a frightened child and one unwanted truth that taught him what loyalty really meant. Not blood, not silence, not power. Truth, held gently enough to heal.